I was born in the Bronx, and when I was 5 years old, we moved to Connecticut, a town called Westport. And I grew up there, and when I was 17, it was a very good year. And I went to Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Hmm.
And this is the true story. And then I was going to go to Yale Law School, actually, and a friend of mine passed me on the college green, and he said, "Have you applied to Oxford yet?" And I said, "No." "Why?" And he said, "It's a 2-year paid vacation." And I thought, hey, this sounds like a good idea. He was referring to the competition to win scholarships to Oxford.
Hmm.
And I hated Richard Nixon at the time and Spiro Agnew, who was his vice president. And I wondered why the American people could not see through them, although, of course, both of them eventually did have to resign in disgrace. And I applied to Oxford. But you didn't just apply to the university, you applied in rotation to individual colleges. And I knew since I'd left it late, I would have to list first a college that would probably accept me. Well, I had known that our previous student government president, a man called Robert Reich, had gone to University College, Oxford, and I thought, well, wherever he's gone, they'll want more where he came from. And so I applied to University College, and sure enough, he had been a red-hot player there, and they accepted me. He, of course, became Secretary of Labor under President Clinton, who he met at University College.
Now, for somebody who's written and said so much about music, popular music, it's perhaps a surprise to many people that you were influenced by, in turn, Burl Ives and one particular 50s, early 60s band called Danny and the Juniors. At the Hop is the single that everybody remembers. That's the single that you, I think, was the first one you perhaps bought even, wasn't it?
Well, no, because my father wouldn't allow us to buy singles. He thought they were an example of planned obsolescence. But it was the first record I heard on the radio where I thought, this is my favorite record. I just loved it. And one thing about it that is so magical to me is because it's live, it actually happened. It sounds as if the piano player is not going to keep up with them. But every time, somehow, he manages to keep up with them. And every time, they all manage to end together in that... Fantastic. Burl Ives. Well, that was the first record that was my favorite song, although I didn't know it at the time because I was too young. I mean, I was about 3 or 4. And the record was called Little White Duck.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the rhyme, I now realize, was awful. The little white duck swimming in the water, the little white duck doing what he oughter.
Very popular on Junior Choice for many years, along with several other Burl Ives classics, of course.
Oh, yes. Well, he was actually a very well-rounded artist. He won an Oscar, as you probably know, for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And he was an expert in the collection of folk songs. And he actually had a couple of pop hits. Even in the 60s, in the height of rock and roll, A Little Bitty Tear, things like that.
Now, who did you listen to on radio? Do you remember as a teenager any particular shows in the States or even when you first arrived in the UK?
Oh, of course. These are the people who influenced me. There was a man called B. Mitchell Reed, who, even though he was only on WMCA New York for 2 years, really was my hero. He really inspired me. It was because of his attitude. He was just so full of life, so full of love of music. And Dan Ingram on WABC New York was the king of the talkovers. He could, I tell you, he could get out just in time on anything. I have a recording of him talking up Twist and Shout by the Isley Brothers, and it sounds as if he's not going to get out in time, but he always does. He could dip in and out if the song introduction had vocal interjections, like Al Green's Sha-La-La, for example. He could make it sound as if he was having a conversation with the recording artist. And that's left an impression with me as well.
And what about when you arrived in the UK then? Who were the sort of people who influenced you over here and perhaps, led you towards a broadcasting career? 2
people who made an impression on me at first were Tony Blackburn, because he played a lot of Motown on the Radio and Breakfast show. And I loved Motown. I was a Motown freak. I later realized he had more needle time than the other DJs. Now, there was this time in BBC history when the radio stations were only allowed by the record industry to play a certain number of hours of records every week. And because Tony had the Radio and Breakfast show, he had a disproportionate share of this needle time. So you didn't hear orchestras performing versions of Beatles songs and recipes and things like that. I didn't know why it was, but I liked the fact that he was playing records. But in terms of style, it was Alan Freeman. He was so dramatic, caught your attention. And he did a couple of things which I now happily admit that I do. For example, he was the first disc jockey I heard who could use a record as a noun. He could finish a sentence with the record. He would say, and then there was, and it would be All You Need Is Love. So he was very imaginative in that.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this interview. If you enjoyed it, please click on the like button. Make sure you ring that notification bell. Check out all of the other interviews here. And if you can, please help the channel by subscribing. Thank you.